BDSM and cinema share a long history. So long that coded examples of dom-sub dynamics on screen can be traced all the way back to silent film. But it was only in the 2000s that BDSM movies managed to become truly mainstream. So, how did kink become so popular? And is more representation necessarily a good thing? In the 1930s, Hollywood was censored with the introduction of the Hays Code, which prohibited, among other things, depictions of sexual immorality, which included scenes of rape and abortion, but also seduction, nudity, open-mouth kisses, passionate embraces, and everything the code deemed sexually immoral. So, when it came to dom-sub dynamics in American cinema, subtext remained the name of the game until the Hays Code was abandoned in 1968. The aftermath of the Hays Code created the new Hollywood era, and filmmakers had more freedom to explore themes that were previously off-limits: sex, violence, or moral ambiguity. And like European films at the time, American filmmakers mostly borrowed elements from BDSM to use as metaphors. Think cruising, clut, crash, or 9.5 Weeks. All these films incorporate elements of kink, like fetishistic settings, roleplay, and voyeurism. But they are less interested in a faithful portrayal of the BDSM community than they are in using its aesthetics and language to explore themes of transgression, power imbalance, and social inequality. So, in a sense, BDSM only received its first real spotlight in American cinema in 2002, when Steven Spielberg's Secretary premiered at Sundance, starring then newcomer Maggie Gyllenhaal and the 90s favorite sex freak James Spader. Secretary begins on the day Lee Holloway, a young woman with a history of self-harm, is released from a psychiatric institution. Lee starts work as a secretary to a local attorney, Mr. E. Edward Gray, whose quirky office soon becomes the setting for their dom-sub relationship. Secretary is based on a story from Mary Gateskill, which Spielberg first adapted as a short film while he was still in film school. And while the short film remains faithful to its source, the feature tones down its dark, traumatic elements, creating a love story that balances the intensity of the dom-sub relationship with moments of awkwardness and comedy. Speaking on the Hollywood Gold podcast in 2024, Spielberg said that the shift was inspired by two other films, Jane Campion's Sweetie and Mike Leigh's Life is Sweet. Both films approach the dark subject matter of a person struggling with their mental health with a playful and comedic tone that elevates the story. So Secretary became something of a rom-com.
The humor can't be underestimated. I think the fact that Secretary is as funny as it is helps a lot because it does push it into the realm of allowing an audience to have an emotional release that maybe feels more comfortable. If they can start by laughing at a moment of BDSM sexual tension, then that might make it easier for them to go along with the emotional journey for the rest of the film.
Over the years, Secretary, now widely considered a cult classic, has been dividing both the kink community and feminists. The conversation around consent, Lee's agency, and the dom-sub relationship between an inexperienced employee and her boss have only gained more nuance since the start of the Me Too movement. Yet, the film introduced S&M relationships to mainstream audiences in a way that English-speaking cinema hadn't quite done before. And that paved the way for the release of 50 Shades of Grey in 2015. Based on E.L. James's best-selling book series, Sam Taylor-Jones's film was made on a budget of $40 million, but its box office surpassed $500 million worldwide.
By framing the kink as part of a broader love story or narrative, it allowed people to sometimes look past the kink, the BDSM, and focus on this idea of romance, true love, intimacy, and the idea that people do crazy things for love.
And usually, by the end of these films, kink is, if not eliminated, then reduced to nothing more than a quirk in the relationship.
If the kinky sex that happens is part of a monogamous, heterosexual, romantic relationship, then, it's allowed to some extent.
It is what happens in Secretary, and especially so in the 50 Shades franchise. Heterosexual, monogamous love prevails in the end. And while Lee and Edward preserve their kinky relationship, in 50 Shades, kink interests are presented as an illness that needs fixing.
One of the reasons it's been so heavily critiqued is that association of kink with trauma. Research shows that there's a range of reasons why people engage in kink. That it feels good, that they have this kind of innate arousal to particular things, whether it be something like rope, a particular material, whether they have kind of these innate fetishes. And it's not something traumatic happens in their childhood and suddenly they're attracted to A, B, and C. The constant representation of kink and BDSM interests having that association with trauma, it has kind of severe negative consequences in terms of people's understanding.
For a while, it seemed like this is just the innate structure of these films, and they can't and won't give us a different kind of story. Lately, narratives have been shifting. Here's how Helena Rain describes her film Babygirl.
You could almost see it as a cautionary tale of what happens when you keep suppressing your desires and your inner fantasies, and if you don't try to communicate with your spouse about them.
And the film departs from its predecessors' associations of kink with trauma. Yes, the film follows an affair with a CEO and her intern that plays with subdom dynamics and age gap relationships. Most of the time, the intern is the one that holds power over his boss. Babygirl has broadly been marketed as an erotic thriller, and though it will be a stretch to say that the film fits into a classic rom-com frame, it is dotted with comedic elements. And comedy can shorten the distance between the film and an audience that doesn't necessarily identify with its subject matter. The goal is not new romantic love, but sexual awakening, as the protagonist learns what she likes and how to ask for it. The narrative shift that we first see in Babygirl continues in Harry Lighton's Pillion. The film introduces elements present in many classic rom-coms: a meet-cute, a Christmas setting, a family pushing the protagonist to find a romantic partner. But the film uses the safety of the classic rom-com structure to turn the genre on its head and explore taboo aspects of human sexuality. So yes, the mainstream BDSM film is changing. And gradually, the kink community is starting to receive a more truthful and much-needed representation. Crucially, Pillion was developed with members of the gay biking community, who appear in the film and consulted on how the kink scenes should look and feel.
Engaging with the communities, the people who these movies are about, and I think that's a key thing moving forward. The only way that you learn about them and be able to accurately represent them is through engaging with people who live that lifestyle, who are part of that culture.
And I also think an important distinction when you talk about films that explore BDSM is films that serve as an effective fantasy for BDSM and films that serve as an effective model for BDSM. And what I mean by that is, if you did BDSM in your own life and you followed the behavior model evidenced by the characters in these films, would you be practicing safe BDSM or would you be practicing destructive BDSM?
Even if the initial success of the BDSM rom-com was largely due to the genre's deep roots in normative love stories, filmmakers have since abandoned more conventional structures to explore something that rings more true. But that balance between intensity and comedy that the subgenre has managed to strike ever since Secretary still remains at the core of a successful kinky film.
The creative imagination extended to submissive characters is a lot more generous than the creative imagination extended to dominant characters. I think dominant characters are often portrayed as more two-dimensional than three-dimensional. They are people who like to inflict pain, and that's about as much depth as they're given. And I would love to see a movie push against that.
What kind of BDSM representation would you like to see on screen? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and want more, subscribe to Mashable.